Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. This is Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the 17th of December 2023, and I do feel rough as a badger's arse. Alas, I will continue, it's all self-inflicted. Okay, Europe is preparing, so we're on to military aid segment here. And other aid. Europe is preparing to make up for lost military support for Kyiv from the US. German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius has said, quote, "We clearly understand that sooner or later we will have to compensate for something of what may no longer be coming from Washington. The official believes Germany has approximately 5 to 8 years to rebuild its military industry." So we'd heard this yesterday, but it's this idea that Europe are going to need to pick up pace in arming Ukraine, but also arming themselves and reinvigorating the defense industries in Europe. Now, on this subject, it's worth dipping into Ukraine, the latest podcast from the Daily Telegraph, and Don Nichols, who was one of 5 journalists invited to the Estonian MOD, I think, to have a chat about a report that they have just released. And this is probably months in the making. And so therefore, it's something that people are giving serious thought to. Before I make any more comments, this is Dom Nichols. He's slightly sped up. For those of you who are listening to me already sped up, this will make him even quicker. So I do apologise, but just to get through it a bit more quickly.
So Estonia's MOD has released a document this morning. I've got it in front of me here. It's online. You'll be able to find it. It's all open source. It's called "Setting Transatlantic Defence Up for Success: A Military Strategy for Ukraine's Victory and Russia's Defeat." It's pretty short, 20-odd pages, pretty punchy, very well researched, good stats, and they are basically setting out their assessment of numbers, for starters, about the amount of equipment that's available, and more importantly, the kind of defence industrial base potential for regenerating both in Russia and Ukraine with external support. And they're making the point, the top line, if you like, is they say that victory for Ukraine could come in 3 years, they assess, if they've taken the Ramstein group, so the 50-odd nation group of military support for Ukraine. So it's bigger than just NATO, it's bigger than the EU. It's, when we talk about the regular monthly Ramstein contact group meetings, donating and pledging military aid for Ukraine, that's their sort of building block that they're working from. And they've said that if the Ramstein group each committed 0.25% of their GDP annually towards military assistance to Ukraine, which could come out of their defence budgets, then they say that would generate, Estonia says that would generate 120 billion euros a year, which is more than sufficient resources to implement this strategy. And they say that they could have achieve victory in 3 years' time.
Estonia have already announced that they are doing this themselves. So they announced yesterday that they are spending 0.25% of GDP on Ukrainian support for Ukraine. So if all of the Ramstein countries did this, then Ukraine would easily win, effectively.
Now, I'm going slowly because it's literally hot off the press, and I've only just had all the quotes cleared. Literally, while we've been on air in the last few moments, I had the quotes cleared for you, so I will try not to mangle them. But Estonia is saying that the Ramstein Group has a combined GDP of 47 trillion euros. Total commitments of military aid to Ukraine thus far are around 95 billion, so 0.2% of that. And they say at the same time, the defence budgets are 13 times bigger. The Ramstein Group defence budget, 13 times bigger than Russia's. So it's entirely doable. And if so far, Ramstein groups have committed 0.2% of GDP, then a regular commitment of 0.25%, as Estonia did this morning on the way in to the meeting that Joe was just talking about. The Estonian Prime Minister he gave a doorstep conference, and they've committed to providing 0.25% of their defence budget, of their GDP for the next 4 years to Ukraine support. So they're saying if everybody did that, then this can work. And the figures they put on it, they've gone into the sort of defence industrial capacity, and they say that looking at what they can likely extrapolate, albeit with question marks over what might happen in the US with a potential second Trump presidency. But if an extrapolation from today with the figures that can reasonably be expected to come in, then they say that Ukraine can be supported to see them through to victory. So Mr. Salm said, some quotes here, he said, "Real leadership is always revealed when the room gets dark, and we're in a situation now when it's starting to get dark." He said there is a consensus between the defence ministries and the intelligence agencies that Russia will regenerate. The only question is whether it's going to happen in 3, 4, 5, 6 or 7 years. But the consensus is that they will regenerate everything that they've lost in Ukraine, and they will come back stronger. So he was sort of setting the case out for a coherent effort for everybody to step up here. He said Russia is able to generate about 130,000 soldiers every 6 months. Now, of those 130,000, he said only about 40,000 go into sort of formed, ready-to-go units. The rest are still in some areas of training or put as individual reinforcements. But they're only generating about 40,000 new formed units, people in units every 6 months. And said the current rate of attrition is about 50,000. So Ukraine are killing and severely wounding about 50,000 Russians every 6 months. Of course, it's gone up slightly in the last few weeks around Avdiivka, but taken as an average, 50,000. So the point he's making is, if Ukraine is able to sustain the rate of production of personnel and equipment and increase in line with what Russia is likely to be able to do with its economy that it's put onto a war footing, then it will be long and slow, but the maths are in Ukraine's favour. He said that criticisms of the external supporters for Ukraine have been slow to ramp up their industrial production was fair, but he said that's a good thing. Politically, if the attention or problem is in the limelight, it's a good thing because then prime ministers and defence ministers have to deal with it. He said Estonia's assessment is that by the early quarters of 2025, European and US manufacturers combined will get the yearly manufacturing rate of artillery ammunition, 155mm artillery ammunition, in excess of 2 million rounds a year. And their analysis, Estonia's MOD analysis, is that the level of attrition that Ukraine needs to affect on Russia can be sustained at around 200,000 rounds a month. So 2 million rounds a year comes just under that. So they're talking about this way, saying we need to ramp it up, but we're not far off it. And he said, why is this 200,000 figure a month important? It's important because it's doable and it's affordable. It's not a Herculean effort. So I think that's about it there. What else was I? Well, yeah, sorry, just one other point. He's making the case there about what the cost, 120 billion euros a year. He said the European Union's response to the COVID pandemic was 807 billion euros, around 20 times more than the current level of military aid to Ukraine. So look at an existential crisis such as the pandemic, and the EU and others did step up. And he's saying we can do it. We can do this. We just need a bit of resolve. We just need to galvanise around a group, an individual, somebody. We talked about this earlier in the week. Somebody to actually say, right, well, come on, then let's do it. He said, if we make a cost-benefit analysis here again, putting up money for that cause will bring you the strategic stability return. Winning in Ukraine is mathematically doable. It's doable in terms of euros. It's doable in terms of sustaining the same things that we've done already. Victory can be achieved in 3 years. So, not an evidence-free cause for optimism. And that optimism is bounded by saying, we've still got to do it. I mean, this is not happening at the moment. Needs somebody to get everyone by the scruff of the collar and say, right, are you up for this? Right, let's do it then. So back to the point I made in the updates earlier, it's terrific to see the countries, Norway and Denmark and what have you, doing their own individual thing. And that is good. It's all going in the right direction. But it needs to be cohered. It needs somebody, be it, well, it's unlikely to be NATO, but somebody, EU, US potentially, or a European figure to say, right, I will lead this. I will take this blueprint and we'll make it work. That might be.
And that's really good. It's such a good thing that the Estonians have produced a really viable document, an evidence-based document that looks at how to do this, looks at the long-term strategizing, and that could be something that's worth me dipping into going forward. Moving on, Emmanuel Macron has given a speech where he talked about halting deliveries of military equipment to Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates and other countries, and France's negotiations along with the EU are looking to retrieve delivered military equipment and then send that to Ukraine. Interesting. That's like a 2.5 minute bit of speech there, so I won't go into it, but I think that is really good news for Ukraine. If France can do that, bearing in mind that France are the second biggest military exporter in the world. And then I talked about Jake Sullivan's little chat earlier, whether this underwrites the thesis of the US slow rolling equipment because they want to fundamentally degrade the Russia over like a long period of time to really put them out of the game. But sort of building on this is Randy Mott, who's a Republican activist, saying the principal reason for the US slow walking aid and restricting the use of supplied weapons appears to be fears of Russia collapsing into regional chunks based on Sullivan and his staff's recent remarks. This is a delusional concern both as its likelihood and its possible effects. So this is an idea that actually has quite a lot of people defending it, as in, or thinking it, that if Russia was to collapse, the Federation was to collapse, it would go into regional kind of countries, if you like, and this would be a huge problem going forward. And actually, it's not something the West would want. But Randy Mott says, opposition, does anyone left standing have enough support to rally the physical forces to overthrow Putin? Prigozhin had a chance, but his allies in Moscow backed down after he made his first bold move. He was well known and popular in Russia, an example of their taste in leaders, but I digress. 2. Survival reactions. Putin reacted by dismantling Wagner, upping the heavy weapons in his home guard units that he controls, and upping the accidents happening to possible opponents and critics. How likely is it that an emerging opponent would be able to get enough juice before being whacked? 3. The economy. Yes, it's getting worse. Sanctions hurt and the cost of bypassing them goes up with the ruble as the ruble goes down. But this is a question of expectations. Will the average Russian hit a point so low that they rebel? Did they not? They did not in the 1990s when things were much worse. They will always be enough money for the ruling cabal. 4. War losses. Putin's avoided conscripting the young men in Moscow and St. Petersburg from the families with influence. The Asiatic provinces have borne the brunt of fighting. Some of them could theoretically revolt, but what level would trigger this? Who could lead such a move and be immune from direct assassination efforts? 5. Chinese influence. Communist China is likely to do whatever necessary to keep Russia afloat. They will not provide direct military weapons for the war due to the threat of sanctions. They are the most export-driven economy in the world and very vulnerable. Could they help keep order in Asiatic republics? Possibly. 6. Finally, Russia has already lost the war. It has effectively lost control of Sevastopol and will soon have lost effective ability to supply Crimea. The West, even without the US aid or a big change in US aid parameters, will provide enough help to block the big Russian offensive turnaround, as the best Russian units and equipment have already been lost. Autumn put from the war is already largely baked into the cake for Russia. 7. It is unlikely that Ukraine recovery of the rest of its land will change any physical parameter for Russia. The psychological effect will be significant, but it is unclear if it would change the basic factors holding Russia together. And 8. If a Ukraine victory would trigger effects disrupting Moscow's control, the effects would be some small rushes, but all acutely suffering from the same factors that would have theoretically brought down the Federation. The major impact would be a lack of major partner that deranged Western leaders could try to make deals with. That seems to be more of a benefit than a liability. So he concludes the risk of a Ukraine victory powered by more US and NATO aid is causing the collapse of the Russian Federation is low, and its theoretical impact would likely be more positive than negative to the rest of the world. Anyway, so that's just a little bit of analysis I thought might be worth throwing in there. Now, talking about drones, we have evidence that the Ukrainians have received an initial batch of the new AQ400 Scythe drone. It looks like this. You think, goodness me, that looks like a cheap and crappy bit of kit. Well, actually, Forbes has run an article on this. Scythe attack drone is Ukraine's answer to Russia's Shaheeds. Commentators have long asked where Ukraine's reply is to the Iranian-made Shahed drones used by Russia. Now, a new type of long-range strike drone from Ukraine is starting to hit Russian forces. New images from Ukraine show attacks being launched with the new AQ400 Scythe kamikaze drones made by Terminal Autonomy. The makers confirm that they have carried out strikes but cannot comment on details. The company, formerly One Way Aerospace, was founded by a multinational team and already mass produces loitering munitions for Ukraine. The company's vision is to democratize air power with large numbers of low-cost mass-produced attributable autonomy. Under a new contract, they are now delivering Scythe drones, currently starting at 50 a month, but scaling up rapidly to around 500 a month by Q2 2024. Quote, our goal is to produce 1,000 units monthly, co-founder Francisco Serra Martins told Forbes, but it's not realistic to scale in just one quarter. Terminal Autonomy describes their Scythe as a no-frills, cost-effective payload delivery system. The compact design has two sets of wings, one forward and one rear, which provide maximum lift for maximum wingspan and enable 30 fully assembled Scythes to be stacked in one shipping container for transport. The drone's body is made of milled sheets of plywood from a network of furniture factories, which the makers say is more scalable for mass production than 3D printing or using materials such as fiberglass. It is designed to be produced without skilled labor so that volume can be easily ramped up without lengthy technical training. The Scythe has a range of 750 to 900 kilometers, depending on the engine options. Sarah Martins says that that says they can use a variety of engines derived from commercial designs, some made in Ukraine and others imported. This is enough to put a huge swathe of Russia within range, plus all of occupied Crimea. The side has a cruising speed of around 140 kilometers per hour, or 85 miles an hour, similar to the Shahed, with a maximum terminal speed of 200 kilometers per hour, or 125 miles an hour. The side carries a 42-kilo warhead, again similar to Shahed. It says it's a standard payload, is a Ukrainian mass-manufactured high thermobaric warhead, or a pair of 122mm artillery rounds that spray shrapnel over a wide area. Still, there are other options for specific targets. Both sides have made extensive use of radio frequency jamming to block the use of GPS and other satellite navigation systems. Shaheds have often managed to find their targets, though, with a combination of jam-resistant antennas and inertial navigation. The side can take a similar approach using a laser altimeter and lightware to fly at a very low level, around 30 meters or 100 feet. Jamming is only effective over line of sight, so low-flying drones are difficult to jam and are only effective when they are very close to the jammer. But the preferred mode now is to come from high altitude. Quote, "We have moved to fly at 3,000 meters, so 10,000 feet, so any air defense missiles to shoot down cost more than the system. So this is inviting air defenses to shoot them down with expensive missiles. Only on terminal dive will it approach at a lower altitude. The altimeter is used for airbursting and avoiding terrain. Side can navigate in this mode with a visual positioning system using roads and other visible landmarks, so radio jamming has no effect. As an optional extra, Side can also have a video link to the operator, turning it into a giant FPV kamikaze, able to pick out and attack moving targets with high precision. This is only possible with radio range, though, and adds to the costs, and most sides will attack pre-programmed coordinates, command centers, fuel and ammunition dumps, air defense installations, airfields, and other high-value targets, etc., etc. So this is a drone that's being made for these mass attacks, and I think we've seen this in the last couple of nights, actually, where, well, last night, Ukraine attacked Russia in a number of places, Taganrog, the air base in Rostov as well, and Lipetsk Oblast, and so on and so forth. So I think, this sounds like a really positive move for the Ukrainians, where they can now take what Russia are doing to Ukraine and hit Russia back with the same kind of thing. Someone was asking me in a thread whether I can look into South Korean artillery ammunition production, and I can't find any figures. I've had a bit of a cursory, albeit an only cursory, look for them. But it is interesting. South Korea, at 17.3 billion in arms sales, has emerged as one of the biggest winners from the Ukraine-Russia war. So it makes an awful lot of equipment, but it does also make artillery ammunition. It is at war with North Korea, effectively, and has been for a long time. So it's got a very decent arms industry that can make at scale, and has, meant that they have been able to produce things more cheaply than other competitors, say, in Europe. And we are starting to see South Korean manufacturers exporting to, say, Poland, who are buying an awful lot of stuff and then making them under license in their own country. So New York Times reported that South Korea's arms exports rose 140% to a record $17.3 billion in 2022. These defense export volumes include deals worth $12.4 billion in sales to Poland, as it maintains a precarious balance between its unwavering ties to Washington and its own economic and national interests. The report further states that South Korea has maintained a strong domestic military supply chain to meet demand from its armed forces and to defend against North Korea, unlike American allies in Europe, who reduced their militaries and arms production facilities at the end of the Cold War. It's moved to 8th in the world in terms of arms exports. And I guess it will probably continue to move up that list. Let's have a look. South Korea is a new hub of arms production. But of course, the question really is how much is being produced in terms of ammunition, and I don't think this gives too much detail on that. So if anyone can find production statistics, that'd be fantastic. I mean, this is another article connected to that, which is South Korean ammo maker Poongsan taps into the European demand. So Poongsan, a Seoul-based metal and ammunition manufacturer, said earlier this month, and this is going back to May this year, that its defense exports jumped 66.9% to 147.5 billion won, or $111 million in the first quarter of the year earlier. The company's operating profit, meanwhile, jumped 19.5%. So basically, it this is producing, I would assume, a large amount of ammunition that is going elsewhere around the world, and you would assume that is backfilling states so that those states can give Ukraine their ammunition, and that's kind of what's happened with the US to some degree. Anyway, moving on. Defense Minister urges local authorities to contribute to mobilization. So I've said a lot that the biggest challenge for Ukraine is actually boots on the ground. Defense Minister Rustem Umerov has urged Ukraine's local authorities to contribute more to mobilization efforts, the Defense Ministry reported on the 16th. He made the announcement during a meeting of the Congress of Local and Regional Authorities, chaired by Zelensky. And actually, we've got Budanov now today, or this video coming out today, saying that Ukraine needs mobilization to maintain the existing strength of the defense forces. Quote, "We must reject the idea that mobilization can be abandoned. It is impossible. The total strength of the defense forces of Ukraine now amounts to 1.1 million people. No recruitment can cover such volumes," he says. So it is such a big challenge for the Ukrainians, and they definitely need to do something. Right, going on to geopolitical stuff now. Turkey, Romania and Bulgaria have signed a treaty on Black Sea mine clearance. So Turkey, Romania and Bulgaria plan to sign an agreement on joint clearance of mines in the Black Sea in January, according to Turkish Defense Minister. This would be fantastic. So they can clear the mines on behalf of the Ukrainians and really on behalf of their own industries and their own safety in the Black Sea. And Russia really can't do anything about that. And rather than the Ukrainian mine sweepers or mine hunters coming in and which they can't, and locating those mines and doing it, but being vulnerable to attacks from Russian ships, we have these three nations and NATO nations getting together and offering to clear up those mines. That's fantastic. Austria has not yet lifted the ban on the 12th package of anti-Russia sanctions. So this is the Austrian government holding talks with Kyiv this weekend in a last-ditch attempt to force Ukraine to remove Austrian lender Raiffeisen Bank from its list of war sponsors. So it's holding up that Austria is continuing to hold up that sanctions package. The NACP, the National Agency on Corruption Prevention, suspended the war sponsor status for the Raiffeisen Bank after threats Raiffeisen Bank from Austria to maintain a veto over the 12th sanction package against Russia. So they have lifted that war sponsor labelling. As Tim White says, such is politics today. Austria has won its demand for the odious blood money operator Raiffeisen Bank to be removed from the Anti-Corruption Bureau's list of war sponsors. It contributed millions to Russia by continuing to trade with terrorists while others exited Russia. So he's not happy that Austria have managed to leverage that in a similar kind of vein as the activities of Viktor Orban in Hungary. Anton Gerashchenko says Putin has said, so Putin has been out talking quite a bit, and this one particular interview has brought quite a lot of attention. So he said that Russia is not going to go to war with NATO countries. Quote, "Russia has neither territorial claims nor any other interest to go to war with NATO countries." This is on the back of Biden's recent words that Moscow might attack the alliance countries in case of its victory in Ukraine. Complete nonsense, and President Biden understands this. Of course, Putin's going to want to say that this is complete nonsense because that's one of the arguments that is used to justify giving arms to Ukraine. We need to fight in Ukraine so that the war doesn't spread to a NATO country where we have to put boots on the ground. And of course, Putin's going to say, well, that's nonsense because he's trying to take the wind from the sails of people who are arguing for aid to Ukraine. But at the same time, the Russian president said that in response to Finland joining NATO, Russia had begun to recreate the Leningrad military district. So Putin always lies. So basically, he said there is no chance of us attacking a NATO country, and then said that Finland was dragged into NATO and that they did have the most heartfelt, warmest relationship previously with Finland. He genuinely doesn't see the reason. Nonsense, he said. So, okay, this is from Putin. There were no problems. Now there will be. Russia will create a new military district because of Finland's accession to NATO. So that's this Leningrad military district that's going to be created in response to Finland joining NATO. Quote, "They dragged Finland into NATO." No, they didn't. Finland literally voted on it and wanted it themselves. So that's a lie. Anyway, did we have any disputes with Finland? All disputes, including territorial disputes, have long been resolved. There were no problems. Now there will be. So he's threatening Finland with problems, So now there are going to be problems, and he's creating the Leningrad military district right on the borders of Finland. So yeah. Over 2,000 trucks have been waiting in line in the Polish-Ukrainian border amid the blockade. So that's, as of the morning of 17th of December 2023, 3 checkpoints on the border with Poland remain blocked by Polish protesters. And we're going to move on to a few bits of sort of cultural stuff, but here's a bit of a vox pop from some elderly lady, Russian, absolutely slam dunks this. This is fantastic. So what does she say? She says, as long as Putin has freedom, as long as he is on the throne, there is chaos, and always will be chaos. Brilliant. Correct. You speak the truth. Chaos and chaos, says another woman. Even if you have 40 years of experience, your pension will be 10,000 rubles a month. So that's $100 a month. Even the first woman then says, even the Soviet days were better than this. They are all thieves, and Putin is the number one thief. They can put me in prison. I don't care. I'm 80 years old. Tell it how it is. I mean, this is really strong stuff. And I was talking earlier about how, with the migrants kicking off against the police in my earlier video today, which is on my other channel. Sorry, I keep having to do that. It's a problem with YouTube restricting stuff on this channel. Please don't. And some of you said, can you stop putting videos on both channels? It's not ideal. It's annoying for me. It's actually worse for me to do this. I'm not doing it because, hey, look to your channel or whatever. It's because I have to, because they are restricting videos still on this channel. But anyway, in that previous video, I showed that there's people standing up, migrants against the police, and there's been a number of Vox Pops interviews that we've seen over the last few days that really are quite scathing about Putin from Russians themselves. So I'm hoping that there's this movement towards finding criticism of Putin more acceptable, and that might translate into some kind of changes within Russia. Now, she talked about how it was worse in the Soviet era. It's worse now than in the Soviet era. And Tim White here says, as you know, I watch and read a lot of Russian media. You probably heard about the egg crisis. And even Putin had a comment in his Q&A marathon this week. So someone did post about eggs. So although it's quite localized, they have actually had to, I believe, import extra eggs from Belarus and somewhere else, one of the Eurasian nations, I think. Maybe Georgia or something, I don't know. Today, complaints that Christmas trees have doubled in price and now there is no bread in some cities. This is in Rostov, truly back in the USSR. This might be localized, it might just be a bit random, or it could be reflective of a problem in Russia that is starting to build momentum. Now, disinformation king Jackson Hinkle, who's an American who is essentially basically just Russian, and I did that Vatnik Soup thread on him. I think it was Vatnik Soup one, but he was... No, it wasn't actually. It was from an article I dipped into. He is this big person on Twitter and other platforms that is a real grifter and is this Putin mouthpiece. He's got massive, since he's actually gone, he's got even bigger. He's one of the biggest people on Twitter in terms of traction from some metrics. And that was largely due to going all in against Israel and being pro-Palestinian, and that's a really interesting dynamic for a start. But you've also in being against US support of Ukraine and against Ukraine, he is therefore confusing those messages. So you get people who are pro-Palestine will then also buy. It's guilt by association almost. It will be anti-Ukraine as well because they'll see those messages being merged by people like Jackson Hinkle. Anyway, part of what I talked about him previously is that he had some kind of looked like an arranged relationship with Miss Russia, who then went over and they were spanking loads of money on expensive holiday apartments or whatever in wherever it was in the US, Florida or somewhere. Anyway, this was all quite a big do with him getting together with her, Anna Linikova. They've now broken up. The two Russian agents have broken up, says Ukraine Battle Map. Anna Linikova broke up with Jackson Hinkle and is going back to Russia. That's actually... there's a bit more to it than that. Young love sometimes dies fast. This happened to Jackson Hinkle and Anna Linikova, who've decided to end their relationship. Apparently, Hinkle abused her physically and mentally and threatened her with deportation. She referred to him as a narcissist and a manipulator. Well, that would fit entirely in line with what his social media presence is. Very narcissistic and manipulative. So that's good news as far as I can see, and the fact that he's being called out publicly. Now, another cultural thing here, you might or might not know, Imagine Dragons, they're a huge band, and this song, Thunder, is an absolute cracker of a song. I won't be able to play the song because I'll get hit with a copyright infringement, so I'll turn the sound off. But this is brilliant because the lead vocalist, this is what you want, which is... people doing this in public says an awful lot to young people, in this case, to say that Ukraine are the good guys, Russia are the bad guys. So this is... So I'm going to have to turn it down. Because I'll get hit. But this is absolutely brilliant. And then he's saying stuff, and actually it goes on to, as the song really kicks in, he's got it and he's signing the flag as he's singing the song. It's just really cool. And that's a kind of thing that I like to see, because I think it does carry with it a lot of traction. I've had enough of people like Jackson Hinkle and Elon Musk amplifying voices against Ukraine. And what I like to see is people amplifying voices, amplifying Ukraine in the public sphere in a really meaningful way. And stuff like that, I think, is incredibly important. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. Take care of yourselves. And I may or may not be back with you today. I need to do family stuff, which means that there's a couple of videos. I might not get my frontline video out, but I don't know. I need to look at what JR's been up to, if he's done anything on the mapping front. I'm a bit under pressure time-wise, but thank you so much for your support. And I'm going to give some public kudos to people who have supported in Buy Me a Coffee and PayPal and stuff like that allows me to do what I do. So thank you very much. But I'll do that in my next video. Take care. Speak soon.